Howdy Meeps, welcome to the Meeple Syrup Show. Hey everybody, what's up? It's the Meeple Syrup time. It's Wednesday night and it's 9 p.m., which means it's that time of day when we welcome Jesse back to the show.
We
had to kick him out just to get the theme song, so there you go.
With Jesse comes...
Oh, that JB guy. Yeah, that JB guy.
Oh, yeah. Hey, what's up, everybody?
Not much, man. What's going on with you?
Doing well, man. It's holiday season, so busy.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And where are you located, JB?
I live in Orlando, Florida.
Oh, so it's really not all that Christmassy there.
No, it's like 80 degrees outside. I think today was actually 65. Yeah, it's not winter.
Oh my God. We had a mini blizzard for like 25 minutes today.
Yeah.
And you got...
Yeah.
Toronto.
It felt like minus 22 where I live.
Oh my God, it was so cold. Sorry, JB's like, it's fine.
But you're not originally from Florida, are you?
No, I've been everywhere. I lived in Virginia, Arizona, and then draw a line like all through the southern United States between the two.
Right. So you've been kind of everywhere.
I've been everywhere, yeah.
You've been everywhere. Very cool. And just for the people at home, we are going to talk to JB about all bunches of stuff today. But really, you know, what we want to talk to JB about right now is JB's origin story. Just like any superhero, all superheroes like JB himself have an origin story. So we know where you're kind of from. Tell us, how did you get into game design?
Sure. I was actually born into gaming overall. So my parents in 1975 started playing D&D. I was born in 77. So I was kind of born into it. And my parents separated when I was very young, but they both continued gaming. So my mom continued with D&D. My dad was more into Warhammer, like tabletop gaming all through the 80s. And I grew up with it. I first played D&D when I was about 6, I think, was my mom ran me through my first dungeon. And then in elementary school, the 3rd grade is when I designed my first game. I took Risk and Stratego and basically blended them into a U.S. colonies kind of war game. And that was my first foray into game design. I was in elementary school. And so I messed around with it a lot through middle school and high school. And then I stopped and started writing for RPG content. So I used to write for some of the old FASA games, Shadowrun and Earth Dawn. And that was the late 90s and early 2000s. And then around 2005, I started going back into board game design. And that's when I really started trying, a couple years later, my daughter was born. And that's when I really started pushing for publication. So probably 2012, I think, was when I did my first pitch ever. So I've been designing games for a very long time, but I didn't really accelerate to the pace that I do now until about 7 years ago. Nice.
Very, very cool. It sounds kind of like a lot of people's origin stories. Not that you're not special, JB. This is about the time when people started to like really seriously think about the industry as a viable source of, some income, right? A partial income.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's more of a passion thing. Like I have a full-time career, and I enjoy that. That's what, pays the bills. That's what establishes our lifestyle. Right. And the games is all about soul for me. And whatever income comes in is really for the kids. We just kind of set that aside for the kids.
You sock it away.
Yep.
For a rainy day, for some education at some point or something.
Any extra way to get a little income, like honestly, kids are expensive and they got to go somewhere one day. So
yes, that's right.
Get away early.
That's right.
You should.
Maybe what do you do for a living?
I manage IT software development teams. So not a big surprise. You hear a lot of game designers work in IT. They're engineers, something along those lines.
And then the teacher bunch.
We're all teachers.
And then the teacher bunch. That's right.
Yeah, that's true. So your origin story is remarkably like mine, except removed by about 5 years. So I'm 5 years younger than you. Oh, sorry, older than you. Yeah.
You forgot the DJing years.
Well,
did JB have a DJing year?
everybody forgets those. I mean, you just kind of forget.
It's very special, Sen. Not everybody has DJing years.
It's true, but no, like I played my first D&D game at 6. You played your first D&D game at 6. You know, that kind of stuff. But just like a couple years later, and then we started designing around 2007, 2008, when we started pitching heavily. You guys, 2012. So it's just, I think it's like there's a pattern to this that I'm seeing for some people, anyways. We'll just say there is one, and it's a JB and Sun Club. That's what it is.
Yeah, well, and so that was you probably had young kids at that time too, right? 2007, right? Yeah, it was the same for me. It was, when my daughter was born, my wife was encouraging me to do something with it, right?
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about giving it up, and she's like, "No, take the passion to the next level, go for it." So,
yeah, and that's exactly it. I had a very supportive spouse who said, "You guys should do something with this stuff," and so we did, and it was good. Yeah, and it was about the time when Eli would have been 4, 4 or 5, around that. So yeah,
you're right. It's very similar.
Yeah, very very similar. So I've never asked this before, so you get to be the litmus test for this one, JB. I apologize in advance, but what do you think your design philosophy is? If you had a design philosophy, this is something teachers get asked all the time about. What's your teaching philosophy? And so we have to come up with something. So I'm just wondering, what do you think your design philosophy is? Like, what do you aim for in every game that you do? Like, how do we know that's an indelibly a JB Howell game?
I see. Yeah. Probably making people feel clever. I think that's the thing I go for. Like, my primary goal is, as a gamer, myself, I want to feel clever when I play games. And so when I design, I try to make it so that people can feel clever about the decisions they make and, the choices that they make in the game, and feel rewarded by those things. So generally speaking, that's, the primary goal that I'm striving for with each design.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it, Sen?
It sounds very, very familiar. JB's like my taller, beardier clone. Yeah, that is that is my goal, is to make people feel clever. So I like that a lot.
It's like you were born around the same time.
Yeah,
I know, right?
Values.
Yeah. I actually don't know what your design philosophy is, Erica. What's yours?
Mine?
Yeah.
No idea.
Well, I mean, think about it for a sec. Yeah.
I like super immersive. That's my thing. So like for me, everything is very, very integrated, heavily thematic if it can be. And I think that's something that it's like I can't help it. So I'll consider that at least a philosophical approach.
Right. That theme guides you heavily. An immersion guides you. And Jesse, what would you say yours is?
I try to create epic moments.
Create epic moments. I like that.
I want players to have moments where they're like, "Whoa, that was awesome."
They do the Keanu. They do a whole the
full
Keanu. Whoa.
The full Keanu.
Right.
Can we call it that from now on? If you get full Keanu.
Yeah, you get the full Keanu moments.
Okay. It's a checkbox on my playtesting form.
Yeah,
the full Keanu.
Yeah, exactly. Just before we get started some more, I'm going to say hi to everybody in the feed. Hello to Jason. He's saying, "Hey, what up, JB?" That's from Jason from Big Kid Games, and Penguin and Panda and Penguin, whichever comes first. I never know. Zach Connolly, Patrick Langlais, and Shem Phillips says that he spies paladins. I think it's behind you, JB.
Did you read Shem's last comment there?
He's his design philosophy.
I like that. Shem, don't tell us now. We're gonna have you on the show in 2020, and then you can tell us then.
But I like that he put butt clenching.
Yeah,
I know, right?
Butt clenching tension. I like that.
What is? Can someone read that out now? I'm just thinking about our podcast followers
Okay.
who don't
So
have the
for those of
context
you
of
who
what's on
aren't
screen.
looking at the video, Shem Phillips, the designer of Paladins and all those other games, North Sea, blah blah blah, he said his design philosophy is being sure there's plenty of agency and quote butt clenching unquote.
Tension.
And that by that he means tension. He put that in brackets just so we knew what he
I
meant.
love that he put butt clenching though.
Yeah.
Like no part of you, even no matter how I describe my style, even if I meant to say that, there's still somehow would never come up with butt clenching, and I love it.
It would not be in my realm of vernacular,
but I love it.
It must be a New Zealand thing. I don't know.
I don't think of games as butt clenching, but that's awesome.
And I guess you haven't played Paladins.
I guess not.
That's fair.
There you go. Hello to Keith. Hello to Jim. Everybody's here. The whole fam's here. So it's great. And I think, you know what? I think we'll keep that question from now. And it's interesting to think what do people think of when they think of their designs, and what do they think of as eminently their
style almost, or like what their approach is.
Especially for those of us who do a lot of co-design. And I know that JB, you do a lot of co-design with Mike Mihilsik.
I do, yeah.
And
that's right. We have several projects together.
Yeah. And just, totally putting words in Mike's mouth. And I do it all the time too to Mike, so don't worry. What would you say his design philosophy is, and how do you guys gel and or not gel because of those differences or similarities?
Yeah, that's a tougher question because Mike is better than I am. So he, what would his central philosophy be? I need to think about that.
Okay, we'll come back.
It's hard sometimes when you're like, what?
It is hard.
Give me a second.
We'll come back, but let's talk about some of those current games that you have going on with Mr. Mihilsik and yourself. So,
Sure.
I mean, I'm just thinking Papillon, Reavers, and then what else?
Flotilla.
Flotilla. That's the one with Mike.
Flotilla, yeah.
Right.
That's the one with Mike. So Mike and I have Flotilla, which just came out. I think it actually released yesterday. In retail. So they had copies, early copies at Gen Con in Essen, but yesterday was the retail release date, I believe. And that's a big, heavy Euro. It's got some really cool things going on with it. Mike and I can answer the question a little bit in terms of what Mike and I do together, like what our co-design philosophy is.
Sure.
Is we really try to create new experiences.
Right.
So we want you to play something that you've not seen before. And that's really hard to do. And so we, that's kind of the fingerprint that we try to put on all the designs that we do together. And Flotilla does that with this sort of 2 games in one kind of parallel experience that we've created. And that's kind of the signature of Flotilla. We haven't seen anything quite like that before. And that's what we wanted to make sure we put out.
What I really think is neat about Flotilla. And so like Erica and Daryl have a game, Bosk, that has like 2 phases to it as well. But yours, the players have the agency to choose when they go into that phase and say, I'm flipping and I'm doing this now. And that to me, like that hits that sweet spot for me, because my secondary thing about design is I always look for pivots. I always look for that time where it's like my critical game winning decision was this thing. And in Flotilla, it's really easy to see where that pivot is, because like I chose to start that phase now as opposed to before or later. And that's what gave me the win. Right, or whatever.
That was the key. Is the Flotilla wasn't going to be done until we could say each player could never flip to the other game, could stay with the first game the whole way through, and still win, or all 4 players could flip on the very first turn, or 5 players, or whatever. We needed to see all degrees between, all possibilities, and have the game system support all of that.
Yeah, be viable at all levels. Yeah.
Do you want to explain a little bit about what Flotilla is about, just so when you're talking about flipping, people understand like how you're kind of changing play strategies, like what that means?
Yeah, so we built this alternate history world going back to the 1950s. Here in the United States, there was a famous nuclear test, the Castle Bravo test, which the actual testing historically was much higher in terms of its output than the scientists realized. I think it was something like 5,000 times the expected output. And it was, is a history altering test for the United States and their nuclear program. So Mike and I basically just added a few zeros to that and said, what happens if it's like 50,000 or 500,000 times the expected impact, to the point that it would supercharge the oceans and melt the polar ice caps, right? Total science fiction. But it creates, what people like to describe it as the water world kind of environment.
I was going to say water world.
Yeah, exactly. So, 90% of the world is now ocean. There's 10%, landmass above water. And now society's coming together. It's a global culture. They've come together, forming a new government. They're building a floating city, the flotilla, which is sort of like the new capital city of the world. So that's the environment that we built for the game. And then we said each player is a ship's captain at the start of the game, and you're out exploring the world. What does it look like now? You're finding survivors, you're gathering what resources remain, you're looking for technologies from the old world, and you want to bring all that back to the flotilla. So that's sort of the first game experience, is the expo piece of it. The second game experience is when you actually choose to join the flotilla. So you're going to hang up your ship's captain, sell all your ships, and you and your crew are going to convert into builders on the flotilla. And so it's a slightly different experience. I kind of like to explain it as, using classic games. If you took a game like Carcassonne and Alhambra, they're both tile laying city building games, with square tiles. And imagine if Carcassonne tiles were on one side and Alhambra tiles were on the other, and you could sort of switch from playing Carcassonne to Alhambra at some point and rebuild your play area. It's a little bit like that, if just going a little more abstract, but it's kind of that experience. So you build this ocean exploration, and then when you're ready and you flip, you take all those tiles, scoop them up, flip them over, and you're going to reuse them to now build the flotilla instead.
Really cool.
So that's that flip concept that we're talking about. And, everything in the game is coupled so that each side, the explorers and the builders contribute in different ways. The explorers are sellers in the economy. The builders are buyers in the economy. So there's a very dynamic economy where one player will find resources and sell them. That'll alter the price of that resource, and then you might capitalize. All of a sudden, oil sells for much higher than it used to, so you might take a turn to sell off your reserves. And so there's a lot of dynamic interplay between the two sides.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
ahead. I was going to say, what's interesting is a switch between the heaviness of flotilla and then the lighterness of things like Papillon.
Okay. But before we change, I do have some questions.
Yeah,
about flotilla.
Awesome.
Specifically about the heaviness. So one of so I'm running this Meeple Syrup bootcamp thing where we're helping people, guiding them through designing games to a point where they're pitchable. And one of the persistent challenges that's come up for a couple of our boot campers is they're working on games that are big and complicated. Mm-hmm. And you have just published 2 big complicated games that are glued together at the hip. What did Flotilla look like in its first iteration?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, so it was a hot mess for sure. So when I set out to make the game, here's a little backstory on Flotilla. Initially it was my design, and I could not figure it out. I spent about 15 or 16 months by myself trying to build this concept and I had actually initially started with a planet moon concept where I had each player building a moon base, their own moon. So like 4 separate moons around a planet. And then you would stop building on the moon and then go down to the main planet in a shared space. and try to colonize the planet. And it was sort of a race. Like you could spend your whole game building on the moon, or you could shift and go down to the planet in a shared space and compete for resources and stuff. And I just could not figure it out. Like everything that I was trying to do was hitting a wall. And that's when I approached Mike and I said, I've got this design challenge, this game that is impossible. How do I do this? And so we sat down and tried to figure it out. And really, the hardest part of the game was getting the economy correct and understanding how those couplings are supposed to work. The moment that we were able to figure out, okay, make the first game, sort of sellers in the economy, make the second game buyers in the economy, create this incentive. Why do I want to be a buyer? Well, in Flotilla, if you have a 4-player game and all 4 players stay sync side or the explore side, the economy gets really depressed because everybody is selling. So the price of everything goes down to virtually nothing and you're not getting hardly any value out of it, right? So the first person that decides to flip becomes the first buyer in a really depressed economy, so they can take really good advantage of the market. And there's an incentive there. And then all of a sudden there's an incentive for somebody else to maybe capitalize. And so now you have 2 buyers and 2 sellers. And if you're the last person, maybe you don't flip at all. You're the only seller in a buyer's economy. So we once we figured out that we could create this coupled relationship between the 2 games, that's when everything started to click and unlock for that game. And then it was really a downhill snowball. Like we figured that out in February of 2017, and we had the game signed by April. Mm-hmm. So it was only 3 months going from broken and we can't figure this out to a working game that was early in development, but the publisher liked enough of what they saw at that point to just want the concept and then give us 9 more months to develop it after that. I think the hardest part was really unlocking the key interactions that define the tense moments in the game. Because without those, nothing was working. You had no incentive to do the things that the game is trying to get you to do. And it's sort of a sandboxy kind of game. And like it was directionless. Players couldn't figure out what to do. What is my focus? There's all kinds of problems getting players to sort of getting the game to nudge players gently in the experience. And that was what unlocked it.
And was that Mike's contribution, or is that something you guys came up with together? Or was it just like Mike's fresh eyes were able to see that, hey, this is what's missing? What was the dynamic like between you and Mike?
Yeah, so we only live 5 minutes apart. So we get together multiple times per week, and we were just up at a coffee shop. We would go to like the Starbucks, or we would go to a boba place, and we would just sit there and jam it out. So we're talking for a couple of hours, trying to figure it out. We're not even putting anything to the table because we're trying to identify what are these core tensions and what are these core interactions and how do these relationships work. And so it really was the joint effort and the joint conversation, right. But certainly the game doesn't get made without Mike. I never would have figured it out on my own for sure. So his eyes were critical. And then his development, especially of the economy, that first coupled relationship. And once we identified the economy being that first coupled relationship, we really worked on more from there. It's like, okay, well, how many more of these relationships can we build into the game? And we ended up building 3 more of them. So there's a total of 4 of these interplays between the explorers and the builders, where something that you do on the explorer side gives you an immediate reward, but it has a long-term developmental effect for the builders and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. That's neat.
So it took us a couple months to work those out, but to understand that was the key to the whole design.
Very cool. So I'm just going to pop in and say that I think, Jesse, one thing that you're definitely helping the boot campers do is reflect and articulate on their design process, which is exactly what it sounds like Mike and JB were doing when they were sitting, drinking bubble tea and just jamming it out, like not putting anything on the table for a little bit because you kind of got to get your head around it. And it's that reflection on why isn't this working, and trying to articulate those problems before you jump in and make the prototypes or make the cards, or there has to be some logical basis to something. Now, that isn't to say stick it all in your head and do it all in your head and then figure it all out and then make the cards. It's like, when do you think, and I'll ask all of you guys this, when do you think the right time is to make the thing?
I would say for me, there's a part where it's like when I kind of feel like it can go because I can see most of it, but I think very visually. So once I figured out enough of the game that I'm like, I know like 80-90% of the parts. Let me put these in front of me to see if it's going to do what I think it's going to do when it's together.
Okay, yeah.
I can try to play through it as much as I can, but I like the tactileness. I like visualness. So I'll go as far as I can with an idea. I know there's still probably going to be like 15-10%, whatever it is, missing until I actually play it and find out there's way more than that. But at least enough to get it on the table, right? Is that like you have this theoretical idea, you play it through your head. Realistically, you can see how a round plays through or how a turn plays through. What do you need for that round and turn? Can I produce that? Yes, now I can make something.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Jesse. Sorry.
I'm the opposite. I'm constantly trying to build the game because that's how I think through it. So as soon as I have half of an idea, I have a huge pile of scrap prototypes and I just flip over boards and cards, grab pens, and I try and build it out. And I keep running into roadblocks, and that's how I figure out what I need to think more about. And then but my process always starts with pen on paper and trying to make things happen.
Oh, I'm the opposite of Jesse. Yeah, I do so much in my head before I put anything to the table. Because kind of one of the things that my Orlando group knows me for is my first iteration when I put something on the table and say, okay, this is the very first playtest ever. It tends to be a little bit more polished than, most first playtests.
I'm the same thing.
Because I've worked so much of it out in my head, over the previous, 6 weeks. And also I spend a lot of time building that first prototype. So I'll do a lot of design time on the computer because I'm at the same time that I'm designing like tiles or cards or whatever the case might be, I am working through those interactions of those components. So I never do anything pen and paper. I go straight to the computer. I'll make a, full set of cards, tiles, whatever the case might be, working through a full, kind of working rule book. And then I get a first iteration to the table and I feel good that I can present it at that point.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I'm sort of in between, but it's mostly because of working with Jesse and Erica and Jay and other co-designers that it's like, yeah, it's got to get to the table. And that's more because I think none of us are experts at reading each other's minds. No. And so, like, even just the other day, Jesse and I were talking about something, and it's like, we just might as well just make the card because I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? That kind of stuff. It's like, I don't know what you mean. Let's just make it and try it and see if it works. It's like, oh, that's what you imagined. No, it doesn't work. But now that I've seen it, let's make a comment on, the balance of it, or what if it had this here, right? So I think that and I think it's like, again, JB, you and I are very much alike, that I have this notion that I can make it all in my head, but the reality is that it's got to at some point come out onto the table. And so working with other co-designers like Jesse and Erica and Jay and whatnot, and Niles and whoever, it's definitely been good for me to see the stuff hit the table faster, because as much as it does two things. So one, it proves that I'm right a lot. It's like, oh, that was right.
I love that. That's his takeaway from it. I love it.
Right? No. But the biggest takeaway is that I'm wrong a lot of times too. Right? So there's a lot of times that it's like, oh, And the thing is, like, so Jesse's shaking his head. If you can't see this, Jesse is shaking his head, and Jesse knows that I don't argue with him anymore. I just do it. Let's just make it and play it. And in my head, it's like, I don't think that's gonna work, but let's try it. And about a good 65% of the time, it doesn't work. And I knew it wasn't gonna work. But what we found out by playing was even better than if I had made some weird, authoritarian dictator thing saying, no, we're not doing that, because we usually find out some cool interaction by playing, right?
Things are going to break, but they often break in unexpected ways. We're very good at anticipating that a design is not good enough, or something in there is not going to work. That's not going to work. But you put it in front of playtesters and then it breaks not at the joint that you thought was the problem, or it bends in a way that you didn't anticipate, that sometimes reveals new directions to take.
Yes, that's really it. And I think that's the coolest part about it. And so in the end, it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. The game speaks to you a lot. Like I listen to the game when it's being played, as opposed to trying to impose my will upon it anymore. I've kind of given up on that.
What do people want to do in the game, and what do they want to do it, and how can you let them do that?
Yeah. What do you wish you could do?
And is the game going to evolve in a direction you didn't want it to? Like, I've had a number of times in my career, I've tried to build this sort of infinite cycling engine thing, where I take 9 decks of cards and see if I can get them to, interact and shuffle in ways that they can sort of infinitely cycle through a thing. I've tried this 4 or 5 times and failed. I've come up with 3 games, all of which are going to be published, that have nothing to do with that cycling engine, because I just watched the way that one piece of that evolved and then just pushed it and built it into something.
Yeah.
So sometimes the game just wants to do what it wants to do, and you got to see where it wants to go.
That's a very good way of looking at it. We have a question from the audience. Adam Young asks, bam, did you know early on, JB, that Flotilla would be a 3+ player game? Was this a hard decision or just an easy byproduct of the concept?
It was easy. We knew straight away, because the dynamics of the game require that many players to have interactions. It doesn't work 2 players, because everything about the game is the interplay of the 2 different sides, the explorers and the builders. And you have to have 3 or more players to do that. Now, what I will say is, we had a conversation about, is there a way to play this 2 players where somebody is permanently on the Sky side, another person is permanently on the Sync side? It didn't come together. It wasn't right for the experience. So when we pitched it, we said 3+. So Mike and I right now are conceptualizing an expansion for it. We're looking at 1 and 2 player kind of Otama type of options.
Yeah.
And I think we've figured it out, but we haven't put it to the table yet.
Right.
So it's something we're exploring in the event that we get to the place where we make an expansion for it. But we knew that the core experience had to be 3 or more, pretty much from the beginning.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. You could, but should you?
Right. It's sort of like simultaneous action selection with only 2 people. Like some mechanisms just, they need a larger group of players.
Yeah. It's funny. There's a couple of people like Shem who's saying he's in the same boat as JB as you for designing a lot in your head. And then Chris Anthony said the same thing. He spends a ton of time figuring things out before building a first prototype, which usually still fails. But that's the nature of it, right? I mean, when you say usually still fails, Chris, you're in the same boat as all of us.
Everybody.
Like, I'm going to name names here.
Never the best.
Right? You're in the same boat as Zach Connolly and Shem Phillips and Keith Matejka and Brad Batchelor and Derek Funkhauser and Daniel Zayas and Jim Baker and Jesse and Erica and JB and Sen. You're in the same boat. We're all in the same boat. Almost never have we had a game that doesn't fail in some way, shape, or form on the first prototype.
I actually find the most disappointing outcome for a playtest is if it didn't catastrophically fail.
There is something so satisfying, but like, oh my god, it worked.
Yeah. I'm usually like, oh no, it worked. Why?
Why did it work? Something's weird because it did work. And so, JB, let's quickly move on to some of your other current games. What do you got going on?
Oops. What is? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, what are you most excited about? Either of the games that have most recently come out or ones that have been announced. And we'll take Flotilla off the list, even if that is the one you're most excited about. We'll pretend that's not on the list.
Well, I'm actually kind of excited at the happy accident that all three of these games sort of released at the same time. That wasn't the original plan. They certainly didn't sign all at the same time. It's probably 18 months apart from when Reavers was signed and Flotilla was signed, and Papillon was sort of in the middle. So I like the fact that they're all kind of releasing to retail at the same time. It's been good for me. It just generated enough buzz each of the games to kind of help me build a bit of a profile and get out there. So that's probably the thing that I'm most excited about, is just seeing all three of these games come to life at the same time. They were all basically Essen releases for the most part. I think Papillon really doesn't hit retail until January. So it's a couple months behind. But really all three hitting at the same time is the thing that I'm really happy with.
Mm-hmm. And then you have a bunch of stuff coming out, upcoming, right? So let's see, what do you got?
I do.
Yeah. Go ahead. Let us know about them.
So next year there will be several games that go to Kickstarter. I think most of the games I have coming out next year actually won't release next year. They'll go to I say coming out, but they'll hit Kickstarter next year, and then they'll probably come out the following year.
So save your money, people, because here's the list.
So if everything goes as planned, I should have a game called Elements and Idols going to Kickstarter with Grey Fox Games. It's a deck building Euro. It's more of a deck destruction game. It's kind of a really interesting design. It's one of these things where when I sat down to make it, I wanted to make a deck building game that kind of ran counter to all the natural principles of deck building. Your deck is not your victory condition, and the starting cards are the most powerful cards. They're not just weak cards that you want to replace. There's a natural attrition in the game, so it's a game where you end up destroying more cards than you acquire over the life of the game, and it's integrated into a lot of traditional Euro style mechanisms. So it's a pretty unique experience. I'm excited for that one. And last I heard it would be first quarter, but I'm not sure. I'll have to talk to the Grey Fox team to find out about that. And then Nodon should be going to Kickstarter next year. That's with Colossal Games. This is a co-op legacy game that we've been developing for a couple of years now. I actually signed Nodon before I signed Papillon. So we've, right, and Nodon's still in development because legacy games are just hard. Yeah. Right, a tremendous amount of work. And Colossal actually brought Mike on board to be the lead developer. So I've been working with Mike on this as the primary developer of the game. And so we're making good progress. So that's going to be a big, exciting Kickstarter. Right. And then I'm not sure if Wayward Vale is going to go to Kickstarter next year or very early the following year, but this is another one of the co-designs that Mike and I have. It's kind of a hand management game gone crazy. Like it's a really, really intricate hand management game. Again, integrated with some Euro mechanics. So it's a heavier game, and we actually started out making, when we started pitching it, it was a Buddhism based game. So
I remember this one.
We built a game around, so you saw this, and I think
totally saw this.
when Jason was talking about it a couple years ago. So we built a game around the Eightfold Path, with the idea being, there's all these objectives that you have for each of the 8 pieces of the path. But we kind of, we ended up staying away from the Buddhism theme just because we didn't want to integrate religion in games. We didn't want to take that leap. So we kind of shifted the theme to be more of a sort of spirit dream type of thing, borrowing from Spirited Away, the same concept of you get lost and trapped in a dream world, and you're trying to find your 8 core truths of yourself so that you can find your way out of this dream world that you're trapped in. So it's a really neat game. I think that's going to Kickstarter next year, end of next year, or maybe early part of the following year with Penguin and Panda Productions. And then I know there's a lot. Going straight to retail, I have an Essen release with WizKids next year called Gates of Mara. And it's a worker placement, area control, engine building game. So the core concept of that game is that your workers, you engine build your workers so that when you place a worker, it has a custom engine that you've built for each, and you have 7 different workers on your player board. So over the course of the game, you're adding different effects to those workers to chain together sequences, and it has this layered area control. The only game I've really seen with this type of area control was Simon's Godfather game. But where multiple zones, workers can sit between zones and contribute to multiple zones, and so it's kind of this wheel-looking elemental realms world. It's kind of neat. So that'll be another game that comes out next year.
Wow, you got
ones, I know.
It's going to be a busy 2019, 2020, and
it is
looking like a busy 2021 for you. I've definitely heard your name mentioned as, the one to watch. He's the designer to watch.
Wow,
that's
awesome.
Yeah, I don't know how to respond to that. I'll be honest. I don't know how to take that type of comment. I mean, it's amazing to hear, and I'm very appreciative. I just I'm not sure what to think.
Well, just don't let it get to your head, sir.
I will try not to.
We have a question from Brad. Brad Batchelor asks, when you design with Mike, do you each have different roles in the collaboration?
Yeah, we do. I am not as strong at development as Mike is. He's great at design and development. And he does it, he works in the industry full time, and I don't. And so oftentimes on the projects that we work together, I'll work a lot heavier on the front end concept stuff. And then once we kind of get a skeleton and a framework, Mike has been taking the lead on development. We jam all the time. We're constantly on Messenger together. And so we have a pretty solid working relationship. It's great. We also complement each other in the roles that we play. I tend to be a very emotion heavy gamer. So I feel games very heavily. And Mike doesn't at all. So we, if he's a 2 on the scale and I'm a 9 on the scale, we end up finding that place in the middle. When he's got no problems telling me that I'm being too sensitive about something, and I got, no problems telling them that he's being heartless. And so, we have these complementary design skills that we can just, bring together. But yeah, so we play test together, we iterate together. He tends to do a little bit more of the development than I do, and so but it's been a great relationship. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how'd you guys find each other? Craigslist? What?
No, we were just part of the same Orlando design group.
There you go.
So we found it's actually organized by our friend Aaron, who's another game designer here in Orlando. Aaron Holland, and his first couple of games are actually coming out in the next year. So I'm excited for him, but he had organized he and others had organized an Orlando group. which Mike and I became a part of. So we just met through our Orlando design group, which has 50 something, maybe 60 something members.
Awesome. Amazing.
There's, last time I counted, there's 18 or 19 game designers in the Orlando area, like the larger metro, that have at least one publication, whether it's self-published or with a publisher.
So. Wonderful. Excellent. And of the games that are coming out in the near future, which one is like, that's the one that's special to you that you hope it's really the right spot?
It's probably No Dawn, just because the amount of time I've put into that game, I probably could have made like 5 other or 6 other games or more, right?
Like labor of love.
It's going to be colossal. It's going to be absolutely colossal.
Yeah, like those big legacy games are just, and not only is it a big legacy game, but it's trying to do new things at the same time. So it's like tackling, all the buffalo at once. It's ridiculous. So I've been working on this game forever, it feels like. And so when that thing comes to fruition and is a product, that will be incredibly satisfying for me.
And can you give us a little teaser on what No Dawn's about? It sounds like a night that never ends.
Yeah, so the expression is stolen from Lord of the Rings, right? Where Saruman says, "No dawn for men," is one of the lines that he has in the book. And the idea is you have a village that is essentially the last village on a continent that's being overrun by a dark force. And you are trying to protect the village, you and the other players. It's fully co-op. But you're just people. So it's not necessarily a heroes game in the sense that you all have knights and wizards, and you start with a militia that is a farmer and a baker, and some orphan nobles, and right. So they're just people in the village, merchants and others, and you're using your crew of militia to try to protect the village and satisfy certain objectives. Stop different parts of the village from burning down or being destroyed. It's scenario based, so there'll be 10, 12, something like that scenarios in the overall narrative. And it's very player customizable. So that starting militia that you have, I think there's going to be 80 or 90 unique characters in the game.
Wow.
And you can custom build your own militia over time. Each one of the cards are upgradable over time as well, so that your cowardly farmer, eventually grows into the brave, heroic farmer, by the end of the campaign. And you built that character, and you built your entire militia of 8 or 9 characters. Your tableau of skill trees, special abilities, you've built yourself. And there's a lot of other things about it. There's things that the group together builds and contributes to over time. So most of the pieces in the game are customizable in that way. And you're following the narrative of how this village evolves and survives against this ominous threat.
I can hear why this took a really long time. The minute you said skill trees, I was like, okay, there's those years.
Yeah.
Years and years.
Yeah, it's big. But I'm really excited about it because it's a cool game.
Well, it sounds like it. That sounds wonderful. Yeah. And so have you been like cleansing your palette with the smaller game designs in the meantime? Are all these games that are coming up in the near future, are they all like complete and ready to go? Other than, the work that you're doing on No Dawn?
Yeah. Yes. So Wayward Vale is complete and Gates of Mara is complete. That Gates of Mara is going through art assets right now. And Elements and Idols is complete from a design standpoint, and most of the art assets are also done for that game as well. So yeah, most of those games are done. No Dawn's the only one that's still in development. I've been challenging myself with lighter weight games. That was my actual 2019 goal. Because my portfolio was just loaded with mid to heavyweight Euros, and those types of games. And so I really wanted to see how I could do with midweight games, lightweight games. I did a co-design with another Orlando game designer, Don Riddle. He and I, he had a project that I saw and fell in love with that, and he was, kind of spinning on it for a while. So I volunteered to join him on the project and work with him. And then once we got together and built the game, we signed that with 25th Century recently. And that is a lighter weight game where I would call it like Gateway Plus. Really interesting sort of double tile draft concept. And I have another lightweight game that I signed with Albino Dragon that I think is a 2021 release, which is just cards. It's just 88 cards or something like that and 4 tokens. But it's still really crunchy. Like it falls in the probably Arboretum space. My definition of a lightweight game.
Of card games, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So even when I try to make lightweight stuff, it still ends up being moderately crunchy. I've never really made a true gateway game. Gateway Plus is probably the best I'm ever going to get to.
Okay, cool.
Do you think that's because it's those are the kinds of games you like to play, or is it those are the kinds of designs you enjoy making? What is it that keeps you above a certain threshold of complexity?
It's not what I enjoy playing, because most of the games that I actually play are gateway games with my kids. So my kids are 7 and 9. So we play a lot of, King Domino and games at that weight. It's certainly not the things that I play. I think I just struggle with the simplicity of, there's a simple elegance to it that's really difficult to achieve. A good gateway game is really hard because, you can make a gateway game that works and it's boring. Finding how to make it good enough for entry-level gamers and also, challenging the hobby so that a hobby gamer feels satisfied with the experience and somebody that's new to gaming is satisfied with the experience. Like I find that to be one of the most difficult challenges in game design is satisfying both of those audiences at the same time. And I haven't had a lot of success trying to do that.
I think it is the hardest, and I think that's exactly why every publisher wants it, right?
Yeah.
It's right.
Yeah. And so I tend to, when I get to play games like, not with my kids, they are big crunchy Euros, so I do love Euros and I do love making games that I enjoy playing. So that's, that is where a lot of that Euro comes from. But I'm not going to stop trying. I'd like to get at least one successful gateway game before I'm done, if I can pull it off.
You'll get there.
You'll get there. We have a question from Adam Young. Adam Young asks, when doing something new, do you start typing what's in your head first or sketching things? Do theme or mechanical ideas come first? Oh, the age-old question.
Yeah, right. I'm 90% mechanics up development. Papillon is the only game I ever made where I started with a product and then built a game around it. So, with Papillon, I wanted to make a game that had tremendous table presence and it popped up off the table in a 3-dimensional way. And, I worked from product down, but 90% I'm an engineer, right? So I work out systems and interactions and math models, and I build up from the bottom the vast majority of the time. And I definitely do it in my head. I don't sketch things out. It's all upstairs, and then I start typing things out. Not a full rule book, but like a skeleton rule book. Sometimes I've actually written full rule books before I even do the first component, just because I want to understand all the interactions before I start building the pieces, and then I'll reevaluate all those interactions when I do start building the pieces.
Okay. Oh, that's a good question. What tools do you think are like so useful to the JB Howell style of game design?
I don't use a lot of tools, and I don't use the same tools as most designers. I would love to say that I know how to use InDesign or some of those other products. I just don't. I actually primarily use Visio to make most of my game components, just because I'm an old school, again, I'm an engineer. I know how to make entity relationship diagrams. And so that's a product I know how to work with. It's very easy for me to make cards and tiles and all kinds of things with that product. Otherwise, it's Word and Visio primarily for me.
Yeah, interesting. Jesse and I use a lot of Lucidchart, which is basically Visio.
Right.
Software.
I've tried using Lucidchart before. Yeah.
And yeah.
I was gonna say, I think we're getting close to that.
We are trying to get
important end question.
So, JB, take a little time, think about your questions. I'm going to go through some spiels here, and then we'll come back to you. So, for those of you watching the show and listening to the podcast a little bit later, we are part of the Roll to Play Network at www.rolltoplaynetwork.com, where you can hear some of the best live recordings of live play role-playing events. You can hear interviews, and you can hear us, a design show. And hopefully in 2020, Banana Chan and I will be starting up something. I'm not sure if it'll be part of the Role Play Network, but we've already talked, and we're pretty sure it's going to be doing a role-playing design podcast through them as well. So lots of good stuff on the Role to Play Network. So that's pretty darn cool. If you follow us in any way, shape, or form, well, what happened there? Bam. Please do check out www.patreon.com/meeplesyrup, where you can find a bunch of extra content. Hopefully over Christmas, I'll get a bunch of the other stuff that's remaining still from Fan Expo onto the Patreon, where you can hear exclusive audio and maybe even some video this time. So lots of good stuff there. We just had the public release of our last infographic, which was on how to reduce cognitive load in game design. And all that kind of stuff goes out like 1 or 2 weeks earlier to our Patreon subscribers. And so if you want to get it early, as little as $1 a month, I think, or maybe $2 a month. I can't remember what we set the minimum at, but whatever it is, if you hit at the minimum, you'll get that stuff earlier than all your friends, and you can like rub it in their faces. Don't do that. That's mean. But do help support us, because through your gracious support, we're able to keep the show running with a minimal amount of expense to ourselves. Jesse can get a new mic, which we got. We can pay for a subscription to Be Live, which is what you see all the video stuff on. Erica is doing a great job of getting all the podcasts and the videos up online. So we're doing our best, people, and we thank you very much for all the support that you've shown us. If you are on Facebook, please do check us out on www.facebook.com/meeplesyrup. That's where you're watching right now. But if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast, that is where you can find the live streams. We stream on Wednesday nights at 9:00 Eastern Standard Time every week, and unless otherwise notified. You can find out when we're not streaming there as well. Our 2020 next season, anyways, our spring season, will be at the exact same time and date. I have my teaching schedule, and we're all good.
Yes.
Perfect. Wednesday nights, same time.
Keep
same
those
place.
Wednesdays clear.
We're booking them already, guys. So, you can also tell us if you have any preferred guests or someone you've ever seen on. We are booking now. Yeah.
Oh, who do we have already?
Don't say anything yet.
Well, I mean, come on.
No, because then we can announce like a whole month at a time. So come on, build some suspense. We have fun people.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be awesome. It will be awesome. And yes, like Erica said, if you have anybody that you think would be a great guest on the show, that you've always wanted to hear but have never been able to find anything from, give us a shout. Let us know who you'd like to see on the show, and we will do our best. Because we are in Eastern Standard Time, it may be difficult to get some of the Europeans on, but
we try.
We never know. You never know. We can always work some special arrangement out. Okay, cool. All right. Mr. JB Howell, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. What is your piece of final advice?
I would say, as a game designer, think about what it is you want your player to get out of your experience. So, we talked about this a little bit earlier. For me personally, I want players to feel clever. That's what I get out of playing games is, I enjoy the puzzle of games, sequencing puzzles, and, going through tense decisions, tough choices. Those are the things that really drive me as a player. So as a game designer, you have to think about, well, what is it that you want your players to get out of the experience, and focus your design around capturing those moments. So Jesse talked about he likes the epic moments, wants to design for players to feel those moments. If you understand that that's what you want your players to get out of the experience, then you really focus in on, understand. Sometimes I talk about the soul of the game. It's an expression that I'll use when I'm talking to other game designers at the table. What is the soul of the game? What does the game really want to do? And what do you want the players to get out of the game? And everything else can oftentimes be cut away from that. Because you have to understand what the core experience is to make sure that the player's really getting that core experience out of it. So, stay focused on the soul of the game and stay focused on what you want the core experience to be for the players and what you want them to get out of it.
Excellent. Good stuff.
Fantastic.
JB, other than here at www.jbhgames.com, where else can people reach you?
So I'm very bad at social media. I'm old, right? So I'm not social media savvy at all. I do have a Twitter account, JBH Game Design. I don't check it very often. I need to be more proactive about that. I do tend to be fairly proactive in Facebook groups when I can. So a lot of the, Board Game Spotlight, Board Game Revolution, those types of Facebook groups, I try to be active in and participate in a lot of the groups that Daniel Zayas runs as well. So that's where most of my online participation is found at.
Good. Excellent. And Erica, let's see. Where can we reach you at, Erica?
Twitter is Frenemy Games, Frenemy with an I, because I don't like it when you can't read the friend part. It just bugs me. That's just this is, if you wonder where this name came from, it comes from personal pet peeve of actually seeing the word frenemy written out and being like, no, like portmanteau, you need more than 2 letters from one of those words. Sorry, long diatribe. Otherwise, obviously, like if you tag me in anything on Meeple Syrup, I'll see it. My Facebook is more just like my personal stuff. So unless you really want to see my kids, I don't think you want to go there. I would go to Twitter, which is I only put games, and I'm slowly building up Instagram. So remember that one I didn't know I had an account for at 99 people? I'm almost up to like 360.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's like organic growth. That's good stuff.
So I'm like, hey, I posted some things now. I'm attempting it.
There you go. Awesome. You're braver than I am. I'm not gonna do Instagram.
I'm not on Instagram. Right
Didn't know I had it. Figured I'd keep going.
Maybe, I don't know. You can reach me at Senfeng Lim on the Twitters, and Jesse is available at
TT Void on Twitter, and Meeple Syrup Shop Talk is where I spend most of my time.
Yeah, he'll be there running the boot camp for you. And next week's show, we have Matthew Dunstan coming all the way from Australia.
Yes.
And he will be telling us all about narratology in ludology. So writing narratives in and about and for the purposes of playing games. He is one of the co-designers along with his fellow Australian Philip Walker Harding, doing the adventure line of games for Cosmos, which is hilarious because Jay and I are also doing something very, very similar. So we're all doing similar things. It's kind of this, parallel design thing. So it's really cool to talk about with somebody the quality and caliber of Matthew. So thanks, JB, as another high quality and high caliber person in our midst, for coming on the show. It was great to see you. Thanks to everybody in the feed, Chris Anthony, Adam Young, Shem Phillips, Brad Batchelor, Ming Yang, Lou, Derek Funkhauser, Daniel Zayas, Keith Matejka, Zach Connolly, Patrick Langley, Jason Mon, everybody out there in Meeple Syrup Land. It was so nice to see you guys. And we'll see you back here next week, same time, same place, when we welcome Matt Dunstan to the show. Other than that, we'll see you all later. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Meeple Syrup Show. If you'd like to support us on all of our projects, please check out our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/MeepleSyrup. Hope to see you next week.